the first time John Peterson touched clay after returning from Vietnam. His hands trembled so badly he almost dropped it. 40 years after leaving the jungles of Southeast Asia, the memories still ambushed him like enemy soldiers. The rattling gunfire, the acrid smell of napalm, the faces of friends he couldn't save. "I'd wake up screaming most nights," John told me, his weathered hands now steady as they shaped a small figure. "The doctors gave me pills, the VA gave me therapy, but nothing seemed to quiet the noise in my head. Until I found this." He holds up a clay sculpture of a soldier kneeling in prayer, his first creation that finally helped him speak the unspeakable. John's story isn't unique among veterans. After serving as a combat medic in Vietnam from 1968 to 1970, he returned home to a country that largely wanted to forget the war and the warriors who fought it. Like thousands of others, John buried his experiences deep, building walls around memories too painful to examine. "I came home to people calling me baby killer," John recalls. "So I just stopped talking about it. Figured if nobody wanted to hear it, I'd lock it all away. But trauma doesn't disappear when ignored." For decades, John struggled with what we now recognize as classic symptoms of PTSD: hypervigilance, nightmares, emotional numbness, and unpredictable anger. He cycled through jobs, marriages failed, and alcohol became his primary coping mechanism. "I was functioning, sure. I had a job at the post office, paid my bills. But I wasn't living, not really. It was like I left the best parts of myself in Vietnam, and this hollow shell came home instead." The turning point came at age 67, when John's VA counselor suggested an art therapy program specifically designed for veterans. Initially skeptical, John only agreed because, in his words, "I'd tried everything else, so what did I have to lose?" What John didn't know then was that his counselor's suggestion wasn't just a shot in the dark. There's compelling science behind art therapy's effectiveness for trauma survivors, particularly veterans dealing with PTSD. Dr. Melissa Cortez, a neuropsychologist specializing in trauma recovery, explains why creative expression can reach parts of the brain that talk therapy sometimes can't. "Trauma literally changes the brain," she says. "When someone experiences extreme stress or fear, the emotional memory gets stored differently than ordinary memories. The experience gets fragmented. Sounds, smells, physical sensations, and emotions get disconnected from the narrative part of memory. This explains why trauma survivors often struggle to put their experiences into words. The memories aren't stored in the brain's language centers. They're locked in more primitive regions associated with threat detection and emotional response." Art therapy provides a bridge. When veterans like John work with their hands to create something, they're engaging multiple brain regions simultaneously: the sensory motor areas, the emotional centers, and eventually, the prefrontal cortex that helps organize and make meaning of experience. Creating art activates the brain's natural capacity for healing, Dr. Cortez continues. It provides a safe way to approach traumatic material indirectly, giving shape and form to experiences that defy words. For John, sculpting became that bridge, a way to externalize the chaos inside him without having to find the impossible words. John's first attempts at sculpting were frustrating. His hands, once steady enough to dress battlefield wounds under fire, now felt clumsy and uncooperative. "I was angry at first," he admits. "I couldn't make the clay do what I wanted." The instructor kept saying, "There are no mistakes in art, but all I could see were my failures. 3 weeks into the program, something shifted. John arrived at the studio after a particularly bad night of nightmares. Instead of trying to create something specific, he just started kneading the clay, letting his hands remember their own wisdom. I wasn't thinking about making anything in particular. I was just feeling. And when I looked down, I realized I was shaping a helmet, like the ones we wore in country. That helmet became the first piece John completed, a simple, imperfect object that somehow contained decades of unexpressed grief. When I finished it, I just sat there and cried. First time I'd really cried since '69. When I lost my best friend, Rodriguez, to a landmine, that single sculpture opened a floodgate. John began creating more pieces, some representational, others abstract. Each one helped him process fragments of his war experience that had been trapped inside him for decades. It was like the clay knew what needed to come out before I did. My hands would start working, and I'd realize halfway through what story I was telling. While the act of creation itself was powerful, John emphasizes that the community he found in the art therapy program was equally important to his healing journey. Being around other vets, not just Vietnam guys, but younger ones from Iraq and Afghanistan too, there's an understanding that civilians just can't have. We speak the same language, even when we're silent. The art studio became a safe space where veterans could be vulnerable in ways they couldn't elsewhere. Side by side at work tables, focusing on their creations rather than making eye contact, conversations emerged organically that might never have happened in traditional therapy settings. There's something about working with your hands that frees up your mouth, John observes. We'd be sculpting or painting, and suddenly someone would start talking about a firefight or a buddy they lost. Stories they'd never told anyone, not even their wives or therapists. This phenomenon is well documented in veterans' art therapy programs nationwide. The combination of creative focus and peer support creates a unique environment where trauma can be acknowledged without overwhelming the system. Dr. James Wilson, who runs the VA's Creative Arts Therapy Initiative, explains, when veterans create art together, they're building new, positive associations around their military experiences. They're literally rewiring neural pathways, connecting trauma memories to present moment safety, creative achievement, and social connection. For John, these connections became a lifeline. For decades, I thought I was alone in this. Thought maybe I was just weak for not being able to get over it. Finding out I wasn't the only one carrying these memories, that changed everything. After 18 months of regular attendance at the VA art therapy program, John had created over 30 sculptures. Some depicted explicit war scenes, a medic tending to a wounded soldier, a helicopter evacuation. Others were more symbolic, abstract pieces representing concepts like fear, grief, or survivor's guilt. John's art therapist suggested something that initially terrified him: a public exhibition of veterans' artwork at a local gallery. My first response was, "Hell no," John laughs. These pieces were like pages from my diary. The idea of strangers looking at them, judging them, it made me feel exposed. But after discussing it with his therapy group, John began to see the potential value in sharing their stories through art. One of the younger guys, an Iraq vet named Marcus, said something that changed my mind. He said, "Maybe our art can be a bridge to help civilians understand what we went through, what we're still going through." With trepidation, John agreed to include 5 of his sculptures in the exhibition. The opening night was an experience he still struggles to describe. I stood in that gallery, watching people look at my work, seeing their faces as they realized what they were seeing. Some cried. Others just stood there, taking it in. But they weren't judging, they were witnessing. A woman approached John after recognizing him as the artist from his photo beside the display. She told him her father had served in Vietnam and had never spoken about his experiences before his death. She said looking at my sculptures helped her understand what her dad might have been carrying all those years. Why he was the way he was. She thanked me for helping her forgive him for his distance, his drinking. John pauses, his voice thickening with emotion. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my healing anymore. My art could help others heal too, could help bridge that gap between those who have seen war and those who haven't. The improvements in John's mental health weren't just subjective. Brain imaging research shows measurable changes in neural activity when trauma survivors engage in creative expression. Dr. Cortez explains, when we scan the brains of PTSD patients, we often see hyperactivity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, and reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, which normally helps regulate emotional responses. This imbalance explains many PTSD symptoms: the hypervigilance, startle responses, emotional flooding, and difficulty feeling safe even in secure environments. What's fascinating is what happens in the brain during art making, Dr. Cortez continues. We see increased activity in the prefrontal cortex as the person makes aesthetic choices and plans their creation. Meanwhile, rhythmic, focused hand movements stimulate the brain's natural calming mechanisms, reducing amygdala activation. Over time, with regular creative practice, these temporary changes can become lasting improvements in brain function. It's a form of self-directed neuroplasticity, she explains. The veteran is literally reshaping their own neural pathways through creative engagement. John noticed these changes in his daily life. After about 6 months of regular sculpting, I realized I was sleeping better. The nightmares didn't stop completely, but they weren't every night anymore. And when something would trigger me, like a car backfiring, I could come back to the present faster. These improvements weren't just about managing symptoms. John was developing new capacities, what trauma specialists call post-traumatic growth. I started feeling things again. Not just the bad stuff, but good emotions too. It was like these frozen parts of me were thawing out after decades on ice. As John's technical skills improved, he began to see parallels between the sculpting process and his own healing journey. There's something profound about working with clay, he reflects. You start with this shapeless lump, and you have to decide what it's going to become. Sometimes you have a plan, but the clay has its own ideas, its own memory and resistance. This mirrors the process of integrating traumatic experience. The raw material of memory can't be erased, but it can be reshaped into a form that's bearable, even meaningful. In sculpting, you learn to work with mistakes, not against them, John explains. If something breaks or collapses, you don't throw it away. You incorporate that into the new design. That's been a powerful lesson for me about my life too. Art therapist Maria Gonzalez, who worked with John for 3 years, notes that this is a common realization among veterans in art therapy. The creative process teaches trauma survivors that they have agency, that they can transform their experiences rather than being defined by them, she says. It's not about forgetting or erasing the past, but about becoming the author of your own story rather than its victim. For John, this meant gradually shifting from seeing himself as broken by war to recognizing his experiences as part of a complex, still unfolding life narrative. "I started my first sculpture thinking I was just making a helmet," he says. "Now I realize I was beginning to tell my story, not just the war parts, but all of it. The before, the during, and especially the after." The long journey home. 7 years into his sculpting practice, John's work has evolved beyond personal therapy. His sculptures have been exhibited in galleries across the country, and he now teaches introductory sculpting classes to veterans at his local VA hospital. "If you told me at 67 that I'd become an artist in my 70s, I'd have laughed in your face," John says. "Now I can't imagine my life without it." More significantly, John's work has become part of a larger conversation about veterans' mental health and the enduring impacts of combat trauma. "Art communicates in ways that statistics and policy papers can't," says Representative Maria Sanchez, who has advocated for increased funding for creative arts therapy programs for veterans. When lawmakers see these powerful expressions of veterans' experiences, it changes the conversation about what we owe to those who have served. John's sculptures have been displayed in the halls of Congress, at the Pentagon, and in VA headquarters, silent but eloquent testimonies to both the costs of war and the possibilities for healing. "I'm not politically active in the traditional sense," John clarifies. "I don't tell people how to vote or what to think about war. My sculptures just say, this happened. This matters. Don't look away." For younger veterans struggling with their own combat experiences, John's journey offers something perhaps even more valuable: hope. Marine Corps veteran Tanya Williams, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, describes encountering John's work at a VA exhibition, seeing what he created out of his pain. "It was the first time I thought maybe there could be something on the other side of all this. Not getting over it, but making something meaningful from it." At 75, John doesn't claim to be cured of his PTSD. The memories haven't disappeared, and certain triggers can still transport him momentarily back to Vietnam. "Healing isn't a destination you reach once and then you're done," he reflects. "It's more like learning to navigate terrain that used to seem impassable." This perspective aligns with current trauma research, which increasingly views PTSD not as a disorder to be eliminated, but as a natural response to extraordinary circumstances, one that can be integrated and managed over time. "I still have my hard days," John acknowledges. "But now I have tools. When the memories start closing in, I head to my studio. Working with the clay brings me back to my body, to the present." This embodied approach to trauma management represents a significant evolution in how we understand recovery. Rather than seeing traumatic memories as enemies to be defeated, John has learned to coexist with his past. "The war will always be part of me," he says. "But it's no longer the only part, or even the most important part. It's just one chapter in a longer story, Dr." Cortez notes that this integration is the hallmark of successful trauma recovery. "We're not trying to erase traumatic memories. That's neither possible nor desirable. Those experiences, however painful, are part of the individual's life story. The goal is to transform how those memories are stored and experienced so they become bearable, even meaningful." For John, sculpting continues to be the primary vehicle for this transformation. "Each piece I create helps me make sense of something that seemed senseless for so long." helps me find meaning in experiences that once felt like nothing but pain and chaos. Perhaps the most surprising outcome of John's artistic journey has been its impact on others, not just fellow veterans, but family members, community members, and even healthcare providers. John's wife of 15 years, Catherine, has witnessed his transformation firsthand. When I met John, he was already sculpting, but he was still fighting so many demons, she says. Watching him gradually open up through his art, seeing him find purpose in teaching others, it's been like watching someone come back to life bit by bit. For John's adult children from previous marriages, his artwork has opened doors to conversations that were impossible before. My daughter told me she finally understands why I wasn't really there during her childhood, John says quietly. She said seeing my sculptures helped her see that I wasn't just a bad father, I was a wounded one, doing the best I could with what I had left after the war. These reconciliations extend beyond family. Medical students now visit John's studio as part of their psychiatric training, learning directly from him about the lived experience of PTSD and the non-pharmaceutical approaches that can complement traditional treatments. If my journey helps even one doctor see veterans as whole people, not just collections of symptoms to manage, then all this has been worthwhile, John says. The most profound ripple effects, however, may be among the veterans who have found their own creative voices after being inspired by John's example. Marcus, the Iraq veteran who encouraged John to exhibit his work years ago, now creates powerful charcoal drawings processing his own combat experiences. 3 other veterans from John's original art therapy group have gone on to establish a cooperative studio where they create and sell their artwork. That's what keeps me going on the hard days, John admits. Knowing that by facing my own demons through art, I might be making it a little easier for someone else to face theirs. As our conversation draws to a close, John leads me to a work in progress in the corner of his studio, a large piece still partially wrapped in damp cloths to keep the clay workable. "This is my most ambitious project yet," he says, carefully unwrapping the top portion to reveal an intricately detailed sculpture of intertwined figures, some in military uniform, others in civilian clothes, their hands reaching toward each other across a divide. "I'm calling it Coming Home," John explains. Not just about the physical return from war, but the longer journey. Finding your way back to yourself, to connection, after trauma. The piece, commissioned for permanent installation at the entrance to a new VA mental health facility, represents both how far John has come and how many veterans still struggle to find their own paths to healing. If there's one thing I want people to take from my story, it's this: it's never too late to start healing. And you don't have to do it alone. John gently recovers the sculpture and turns to face the camera directly. "For decades, I thought my war memories would haunt me until the day I died. And they might. I'm not claiming to have all the answers. But through sculpting, I've learned they don't have to define me." If you're carrying trauma, whether from combat or any other source, know that there are paths forward. Art therapy, whether it's sculpting, painting, writing, or music, it can help you express what feels impossible to say. He pauses, his weathered hands resting lightly on the covered sculpture. "You fought to survive your trauma once. Now fight for your right to heal from it. Reach out to the VA, to community arts programs, to other veterans. Your hands remember things your mind might want to forget. But they also know how to create, how to connect, how to build something new from the broken pieces." John smiles slightly, a genuine expression that reaches his eyes, bringing warmth to a face that has witnessed so much suffering. The war may always be part of your story, but I promise you, it doesn't have to be the end of it.